Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 888. My opponent started off with e4 here. And I went to d5, the Scandinavian defense. He took, which is normal, and I played knight f6, the second choice here, but it's the line I usually play. And now he plays the fourth choice here, c4. So there's lots of interesting ways to play. At this point, d4 is the main move. Either of the knight moves are okay. And bishop b5 check is a very interesting way to play as well. And all of those lead to good positions for white. So I think you can learn any of those. And the first three just give the pawn back right away. And after in this bishop b5 check line, you also get the pawn back. c4 is an attempt to hold on to the pawn, and it's just not particularly good, especially the way my opponent played it. So c6 here. At this point, you have one last chance to kind of bail out. You could play knight to c3, top choice here, and that actually gives the pawn back. After black takes, you take, and then he can take back. So that's okay. d4 is a way to transpose into the, this is actually the Panov-Botvinnik attack against the Caro-Kann, oddly enough. But it's a transposition. So either of those moves will get you out of trouble if you ever find yourself in this point. But taking, this is just a good gambit for black. I should mention there's another gambit. This one that I play, c6, is known as the Scandinavian gambit. e6 is known as the Icelandic gambit, and that's also an interesting gambit for black. I've just never played it, so I don't know the lines there. Okay, but c6, he takes, and so now we're into the Scandinavian gambit. So let's go on. Looks like we have a normal move or two here. e5. This is very important. You can always get that move in. He can't play the move d4 in time. That's one of the problems with white's play. So you're going to get this influence on the center, and then d3 is the normal move so that he can develop his dark squared bishop. But that does kind of block in the light squared bishop. So this is black's advantage, and he's got more than enough compensation for the pawn. It looks like the main move here is actually bishop f5 right away. I was kind of surprised to find that the chess engine didn't really like this bishop c5 move. So I looked at it a bit with the engine. It also thinks that the way that, is that in the opening book? Yeah, e4 is in the opening book too. Yeah, the chess engine thought the best way for black to proceed and get the biggest advantage was actually to push on with e4 immediately. I've never played this way myself. I usually just develop the bishop. D takes e4, trade queens, king takes, and take the pawn back. You're still a pawn down, but white's king is in the center. You're threatening here on f2, and there's also going to be a weakness on c2. This knight maybe can come in here to there. So anyway, black has an active position and more than enough compensation for the pawn. So anyway, that's the best. That gives a pretty big edge to black according to the chess engine. Whereas bishop c5, seems like white is okay after this with good play. Let's see, he goes bishop e2. That's reasonable. We both castle. And then I played h6, and we're just out of the opening book at that point. But we were in a section of the opening book where there were only one or two games anyway, so it wasn't that important. Bishop f5 was a move here. And, I was just worried about this knight h4. So I checked it with the chess engine again, and it just drops the bishop back. So you don't want to drop the bishop back to g6 and allow it to be traded off. You want to keep your bishops in this position. So I guess you've had to move the bishop twice, but maybe this knight is out of play over here as long as you keep an eye on the f5 square. So that's the in this position. That's the most active way to play is with bishop f5 directly rather than throwing an h6. So after h6. White starts to have more of an edge. I think it's been pretty balanced up to this point. It's still not quite, white is still not quite a pawn up at this point. There's still some compensation for the pawn, but maybe not enough if it's played correctly. Anyway, he goes knight c3 here. I go bishop f5 now, and he goes bishop to e3. The chess engine Well, actually, that was okay. I take that back. That was not a bad move. There was just an alternate way of playing here, which was interesting, which is to play a3 with the idea of playing b4 and kicking my pieces around, and that can be effective for white as well. But this was an okay move, bishop to e3. And then, yeah, the chess engine didn't like bishop d6. So this point, somewhere around here, was probably white's largest advantage. Yeah, I think it was right here after bishop d6. So the chess engine recommends playing queen e7. Doesn't even think black should trade, although that's an option. You know, I just didn't want to give up that good bishop. But you know, white has established some measure of control over the dark squares here. So he's basically out of trouble. Let's say after bishop e3, I went bishop d6, and so the way for white to prosecute his advantage at this point is to play d4. And yeah, if he gets on d4, then white is going to be pretty good. Now the line goes like this: I take, he takes, and I would probably keep taking. He's hitting my bishop, and I don't particularly want to retreat it at this point. Bishop takes, and then maybe rook e8, activate a piece. And if we look at this, white is still a pawn up. His pieces are looking okay now. So, you know, it's almost a full pawn at this point. And this is probably white's biggest chance for an advantage here. Instead, he went queen c2. And so we're back in the range of about even. I go rook e8. He goes knight e4. All these are pretty reasonable moves, really. Hitting my bishop, I drop back. He goes knight to d2. He's maybe preparing to push his f-pawn forward. Knight d2, I think maybe that's a little bit questionable. Let's see. So I get in knight g4, hitting his bishop. Yeah, maybe he was going to play a move like f3 to chase my knight away. And he was just getting his knight out of the way so he could do that, but it's kind of a move short. So anyway, he kicked my knight just to kind of force things here. This I can't say this. The chess engine didn't really object to it. I thought it was a little bit peculiar to give up the bishop so easily, but seems to be okay for white. Let's see. So I just dropped back to g6, and now I played knight f3. That's putting the knight back there is a bit of a mistake. So what should he have played here? Oh, the chess engine wants to play g4 and keep some edge for white. So knight f3. The problem with that move. Yeah, bishop g6, knight f3. The problem with that move is it just walks into f5, which I play immediately. And now there's actually, this is a very tricky position, it turns out. There's only one move that even keeps white in the game, and all the other moves lose. So the only move is knight to c3. And it's a little bit subtle why this move works compared to knight f2. So let's look at a line similar to what I played in the game, which is e4. e4 is actually not the best move here. The best move here is bishop to b6, activating the bishop, and should be an okay position for both sides. But if I push on with e4, as in the game, he takes, I take, he brings his rook over to chase my queen, and if I go to squares like e7 or f6, the knight here can come into d5 and harass my queen. So that's one point of this knight on c3. So the best move here is, rather than move the queen, to keep on taking. Queen takes bishop. I keep on taking. And then he has queen f7 check, getting the queen to a square where it hits my bishop over here. And we'll see the importance of this. The king moves out of the way. Rook takes queen. I can throw in pawn takes rook with check. So he has to respond to that, and then I can take back, and then he can grab the bishop. And it's black's move, and we can pause and think about what's going on here. Basically, I have two rooks for the queen and two pawns, and so that's a slight edge to white. The queen and one pawn are equal to two rooks, roughly speaking. So there's a slight edge to white, a one pawn edge to white in this line. So that's a pretty long line. It started on move 17 and went to move 24. So that's seven moves deep, or 14 half moves, depending on how you think of it. It's a pretty deep line. He went knight f2 in the game. and I played e4, and then he didn't take, but the best move was taking. And if we follow through that same line, pawn takes, rook to d1, hitting my queen. It's actually a little better to bring the other rook in this case, but just to keep it similar to show the differences. So now I still not so great to move my queen, but I could consider moving my queen to f6. That's an option here. But the best move here is to take the knight, and then queen takes bishop, and then pawn takes bishop, and then rook takes d8. All this is as before, and then I can take his rook with check. Yeah, that was the difference. At this point, after I take here, he didn't take my queen immediately. He threw in queen f7 check. That no longer works because this knight here is blocking the rook. So you know, 4 moves deep into the combination, or 5 moves deep into the combination. That's the difference between the two lines. So since he doesn't have queen f7 check, he takes my queen right away. I take his rook with check. He takes back, and then I take his rook. And so in this line, I have 2 rooks against the queen, but I also have the bishop still. And that's a big difference, and black is just much better here. So anyway, that shows why chess engines and grandmasters are so strong. They can calculate that deeply and notice these differences. So going back to this position after the move f5, this is the position in which you have to make that decision. And the difference between those two lines is like 5 moves deep from here. You have to notice that you want this rook to have an open line, so when your queen comes over here, it can get in this move, queen f7 check. Anyway, he played knight f2, and after I went f5, after I went f5, he did knight f2. After I went e4, instead of taking, that's really his best chance. But I showed you how black comes out ahead on that line. He played knight d4. Now this is going downhill really quickly. And I did manage to find all the good moves here. They weren't necessarily the best moves each time, but they were definitely winning all the way. So queen d6, threatening a mate immediately, so he has to respond. Went rook f to d1, so getting the rook away so the king can run from the check, and putting the rook on an active square. So I come in with check, king f1. He really didn't have anything better there. Then knight takes d4. This is another good move that I spotted, opening up a line for my pawn to come through. He takes, I push the pawn, and now really his best move here is to play bishop to f3, and then I can just take here and be a piece up and still attacking. So that is kind of a simple win. Actually, taking the knight isn't even the best move here. The chess engine keeps playing with the pieces, just kind of pouring more fuel on the fire, bringing the bishops in like this, and not even bothering to grab the material right away. But it's simple enough to take the knight and just be a piece up. So anyway, he tried this move, putting the queen on a square where he threatens my king, but there's no real follow-through, so I can just kind of ignore that check. I mean, this pawn coming forward doesn't make any other threats. There's no pieces it's hitting here. And in fact, there's a forced mate from this position. He can prolong it, so it didn't have to be, I think it's a mate in 4 or 5 in the worst case. But the only way he can prolong it is by pushing this pawn with check and then throwing his queen away with check. That gives him like a couple extra moves. but basically it's all losing here. And it starts with this move. He takes f2. I'm just going to come in here with the queen and mate him if he doesn't take. So he takes, and then bishop g3 check leads to a mate in 1 wherever the king goes. If he goes back here, queen comes here and it's checkmate. And if he comes here, the bishop here is checkmate. And that's kind of a pretty mate. I thought put that on the board here. This bishop is guarding these escape squares. This pawn is guarding these escape squares, and of course this bishop is skewering through here, and the rook is covering that escape square. So Anyway, the king is just trapped that way. Let's go back to the final position of the game. He just resigned here. Anyway, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you later. Bye.